Warning: all of the artwork in this presentation would be commonly displayed in a public museum. Nevertheless, there are images of surgical procedures and some nudity that may be disturbing to some viewers. Medical landmarks as portrayed in classical art. This presentation was created by and is narrated by Richard Butcher. Copyright 2024, Richard E. Butcher. Few subjects are as dramatic as are the landmarks in medical practice and discovery. These milestones provide famous artists with unique opportunities to document medicine's turning points. This presentation will display selected works of art that illustrate major events in medical history. Each of the artworks will be accompanied by an annotation that includes the title of the artwork and the artist's name. These will be followed by the date of the artwork. In some cases, the date of the artwork will not correspond with the date of the medical event. In these cases, the actual date of the event will be added in parentheses. The figures in this painting by the renowned artist Rembrandt are members of a Dutch doctors' guild. Members paid a fee to be included, and the painting served to document their guild membership. Such funded group paintings were commonplace in Amsterdam, as is the case with Rembrandt's more celebrated painting, The Night Watch. Though Dr. Tulp is portrayed as performing the dissection, the actual dissection would have been done by an assistant. Note that Tulp is wearing a hat. This must have been a mark of distinction, inasmuch as Tulp insisted that Rembrandt paid out a hat that had been shown worn by another figure. Note also that here, as elsewhere, the participants are wearing ordinary clothes. These became contaminated and could have served as vectors for often fatal infections in other patients. Anatomic lessons of this sort were public events. They occurred over several days, and attendance could be had by paying a fee. In the 17th century, the dissection of a corpse was such an unusual event that often as much is reported about the corpse as is known about the anatomists leading the dissection. Bodies were those of executed criminals, and the assignment of their bodies for the dissection was considered an additional punishment for their crimes. Restrictions on the use of human remains for anatomic studies were severe, and were not entirely lifted in England, for example, until as late as 1853. The obvious need for bodies for anatomic instruction led to the theft of corpses. These were ideally fresh and obtained by professional grave robbers, known as body snatchers, night doctors, or resurrectionists. Ironically, the penalty for stealing a body was not as severe as dissecting a corpse, which was a much more major crime. Sometimes what appears to be a straightforward artwork will contain a subtle, more spiritual message. The Anatomist by von Max is not just a peekaboo painting. Von Max participated in a mystical tradition of his time, and in this painting includes some memento mori, reminders of death. The skull is an obvious reminder of the inevitability of death. The youth and beauty of the woman reflects the transitory nature of life, and the cricket and other insects have very short lives. Note that here, as elsewhere, autopsy subjects tend to be beautiful, nude young women, supine and helpless, images that artists knew would add the frisson of sex to further engage the attention of the viewer and maybe their saleability? Here we have two works by Thomas Eakins, a Philadelphia artist whose interest in medicine went so far as to cause him to actually enroll in anatomy courses. Eakins himself is included in the Gross Clinic painting, shown sketching, shown over the right shoulder of Dr. Gross. Note also the frightened mother of the patient who is shown at Gross's right hand. Called America's greatest realist, Eakins' work, The Gross Clinic, is regarded as the finest American painting ever made. Note also how the medical personnel have changed from frock coats to hospital gowns in just a few years. Here we have a painting of an autopsy by Paul Cézanne. Cézanne was the leader of the post-impressionist school of art, and here we see the loose brushwork that is characteristic of the period. Of Cézanne it has been said, modern art began with him, and Picasso described him as, quote, the father of us all. Throughout history, infections have caused deaths on a catastrophic scale. Because the origins of these plagues were unknown, near panic would run through a population being more than decimated by infection. Here, Peter Bruegel the Elder, earliest of the Surrealists, portrays the grisly chaos that would run through a population beset by plague. In Europe in the 14th century, plague caused 25 to 30 million deaths, fully one-third of the population. One might contrast these numbers to the 1.1 million deaths the U.S. experienced from COVID. In the picture of the Great Plague, Greer, a contemporary artist, reflects the gloom and desperation of London in the 1600s, where plague took 400,000. Note the costume of the plague doctor. The beaked mask contained aromatics to cover the odor of death, and to dispel the miasma, the foul-smelling air thought to cause the infection. The doctor wears a waxed coat to prevent contamination from contact with the plague victims. Caravaggio, the creator of this painting, was such a troublemaker that most of what is known of him comes from criminal records. Nevertheless, he is considered a singular master of the post-Renaissance Baroque period. He is known for portraying his subject realistically and spotlighted against a dark black background. What has made young Bacchus sick? He is showing jaundice from malaria. Malaria, one of history's most deadly infections. The historic death toll from malaria, 1 billion, 20 to 30 million in just the last 10 years, 650,000 in 2020 alone. In this portrait, Rembrandt provides an unflinching revelation of his fellow artist's disease. Observe the syphilis sores around Gerard's mouth. Gerard went blind shortly after this was painted and was dead within a year. Jenner is shown here vaccinating young James Phipps with cowpox, which conveyed immunity to smallpox. Jenner later challenged the immunization by inoculating James twice again with material from actual smallpox lesions. Jenner, as a boy, had himself been inoculated following the introduction of inoculation to Britain by Lady Wortley Montagu in 1721. Early anti-vaxxers funded this illustration by the innovative printmaker James Gillray. Here, the recipients of the vaccine need purging and grow bizarre cow-like appendages. One of history's deadliest infections, smallpox throughout its history caused 500 million deaths and all but eliminated some native populations. Smallpox immunization has been the most successful in history, and smallpox remains the only naturally occurring disease that has been completely eradicated. Already a specialist in the administration of anesthesia, John Snow plotted the incidence of cholera in London on a map, later described as the ghost map. Cases were focused on the Broad Street water pump, indicting its water as the source of the epidemic. So convincing was Snow's presentation to the parish Board of Guardians that they removed the handle of the pump the very next day. A contributor to the advancement of germ theory, Snow is sometimes referred to as the father of epidemiology. Pasteur, known as the father of bacteriology, produced accomplishments that seemed too numerous to be the work of just one man. He developed vaccines for rabies, anthrax, fowl cholera, and smallpox. He invented the process now called pasteurization, which kills microbes, and prevented spoilage in milk, beer, and other goods. Pasteur was the discoverer of microorganisms that caused fermentation, and he popularized the germ theory of disease, fostering the hope that other vaccines could be developed and prevent infectious diseases. A man laid on the operating table in one of our surgical hospitals is more exposed to the chances of death than an English soldier on the field at Waterloo. So reads an 1860 quotation that summarizes the shocking state of post-operative infections at that time. Joseph Lister, now known as the father of modern aseptic surgery, applied the knowledge gained by Pasteur to create a more germ-free surgical environment. He is shown here using a carbolic acid generator to spray and sanitize the surgical field. This painting shows Alexander Fleming, the discoverer of penicillin. He's seated at his workbench and at the window through which wild penicillin mold blew in and landed on his media dish. Though discovered in 1928, penicillin did not come into widespread use until the beginning of the Second World War, and even then it was scarce. The antibiotic's low bioavailability at times allowed the distillation of penicillin from a patient's urine, leading to the claim of some hospital GIs with urine collection bags and IVs, quote, "All I did is switch the bags." This Traversy painting dramatizes the agony that patients endured in surgery. The only pain relief available at the time was from alcohol or laudanum, which was usually a mixture of opium and brandy. Real anesthesia still lay 100 years in the future. Toulouse-Lautrec was known for displaying the raucous gaiety of 19th century Paris and the Moulin Rouge. Even he was struck by the pain of undergoing surgery. With medical problems of his own, Lautrec was a victim of his aristocratic heritage. The inbreeding of his parents, common during this period, probably caused a genetic weakness of the bones which led to Lautrec's short stature. Anesthesia at last. This painting shows Morton, a dentist, extracting a tooth. He's using ether in what is regarded as the first use of surgical anesthesia. Just a few days later at Mass General, Morton provided anesthesia to a patient having a tumor removed from his throat. For many years, history painters received the most prestige, more than portraitists or painters of still lifes. Here we see two history paintings that illustrate the great epidemics that at times raged almost unchecked, often as the result of a simple lack of sanitation. Nightingale found that more soldiers suffered and died from typhus, typhoid, cholera, and dysentery than were disabled from battle wounds. Although painted after the event, of course to enhance Napoleon's heroic image, Napoleon really did visit bubonic plague victims. But later, he killed through overdose of laudanum 50 of his own non-ambulatory wounded. Philippe Pinel, who has become known as the father of modern psychiatry, became interested in mental illness when a friend descended into melancholy and committed suicide. Later, as the director of a large clinic, the Salpêtrière, he came to believe that mental patients should be treated with kindness. He believed that with understanding, they might be cured, and he substituted careful observation of the patients for the bleeding, purging, blistering, and the restraints which had been part of the prior treatment of the mentally ill. Hieronymus Bosch, among the earliest of the Surrealists, shows us here the drama associated with trephination. This surgery was a favorite subject among early Flemish artists. Here a surgeon, using a 16th century scalpel, removes the stone of madness or folly from the head of a patient. Almost certainly, the surgeon is a charlatan who uses sleight of hand to later produce the stone. Beginning in about 1640, the Chamberlain family of obstetricians developed and used obstetrical forceps, but they kept the forceps secret for 100 years. They excluded everyone from the delivery room, blindfolded the mother, and made clanking noises so that it would be believed that they were using a, quote, delivery machine, unquote. Becoming highly regarded, nevertheless, they attended Queen Henrietta Maria of England. As, by the way, so did William Harvey, who first described the circulation of the blood. This painting documents an early use of hemostatic clamps. Note in the detail that the clamps seem to bear a close resemblance to modern-day hemostats. Note also that the participants in the surgery are wearing frock coats and are barehanded. Note also the very attractive female patient. This painting purports to illustrate the first attempt to cure cancer using X-ray irradiation. This was done by the French physician Victor Despentes. Although the first patient was a male suffering from stomach cancer, We see here a treatment for what appears to be a breast cancer. Note, first, that the patient is a remarkably attractive woman, and second, that it is simply not possible to do therapeutic radiology without the wearing of a hat. Our final artwork is The Hands of Dr. Clarence Moore by the artist Diego Rivera. Rivera is one of the tres grandes of Mexican art. This unusual portrait has been on almost continuous display in the collection of the San Diego Museum of Art. The banner reads, "These are the hands of Dr. Clarence Moore of Los Angeles, California. They trim the tree of life so that it is renewed and does not die." Thank you for your attention to my presentation. I leave you with a final word. The events featured in this presentation might well cause us to reflect that we are in the midst of the most exciting time in the history of both art and biomedical discovery.